How do we go from agonizing over feedback to looking forward to it, to say, okay, this is going to be great. I'm going to get some stuff that's going to help me grow. That's really easy for me to say. I mean, I almost feel just goofy putting it in a question that way, because that's not an easy emotional state to get into. I can say it, but it's not as easy to do.
No, it's not. And I always like to recommend good resources. I think the book's called Thanks for the Feedback by Sheila Heen is one of my favorite books I've read on feedback. One of the things that I try to do is try to tell myself and then tell the team is that we don't endure feedback, we embrace it. A lot of times whenever we get feedback, we tend to think it's feedback on who we are, and generally it's not. It's usually feedback on what we do. We feel like it's feedback on our identity, but it's more feedback on our performance, and we have to hear that. If I don't give you feedback, that's more of an expression that I don't love and don't care about you. If I genuinely love and care about you, I want you to get better, and so I'm going to give you feedback. At the same time, if some people say, well, Craig, you're the leader of the organization, why would you let people anonymously give you feedback? If I don't do that at the point position, then how in the world can I expect it to be given through the whole organization? The truth is that any kind of feedback it can often be difficult to hear, but it's kind of like if you were playing a sport and I told you, hey, your baseball swing's off or your golf swing's a little bit off, and I helped you improve, you would say, thank you very much. Why in the world in business and leadership and ministry would we not want the same thing? Someone who sees something from the outside that can help us get better. Instead, we need to say thank you. The other thing that I've found, Ken, is whenever I'm most defensive, that's generally an indicator of the place that I have the most to learn. Whenever I want to push back and say, no, you're wrong, you don't know me, that's not right, that's generally an indicator that I have a big blind spot. And so now I recognize that's a cue that I probably really do need to learn something for the feedback. Okay,
I don't want to move on here because you're exactly right. I'm sitting here thinking about it. If I go to a golf lesson, I'm going to cringe when I watch the videotape just because, your swing always looks better in your mind than it actually does on camera, right. At least for most of us. And yet I don't take any of that critique personal. He's like, your swing's flat here, your weight's not distributed, whatever it is. And I go, okay, great. And I can take that. But then if you talk about my job performance, it still feels personal. And you touched on that. Mm-hmm. So again, I want to stay here because there's got to be some maturity. There's got to be some level of, I've got to be intentional here and practice this muscle or build this muscle of feedback, be able to receive feedback so that it's not, okay, this is who I am as a person. This is just how I'm performing. I know you touched on it, but I feel like we need a little bit more here. How do we get to that point where it's not as agonizing?
Well, I think if it's your golf swing, that feels like a hobby, that's a performance, that's not identity, unless maybe you're a pro golfer, and then it might feel more like identity. But in work, this isn't something we do for a couple hours a week for fun. This is, 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And right or wrong, we often do tie our identity in with our work and our performance. And so I think by nature, it's a little bit more difficult. I think one of the ways that we can work with an individual to help them get better at giving and receiving feedback, but even more importantly, what we want to do is we want to think organizationally, not just individually. If we can train our whole organization to be both better at giving and better at receiving, then organizationally it's something that we embrace, not something that we endure. For example, when we interview people to come into our organization, one of the things that we always do big group interviews and have, dozens of people in for an interview day. Everybody does some sort of performance, some sort of talk, presentation or whatever, and then everyone in the interview process has to give feedback and receive feedback. This is really important because what we want to do is we want to see how do they give it, how do they receive it, but we also want them to know before you ever step foot on this team, we're a high feedback organization. Whenever I meet with our new team members, once a quarter, we have a bunch of them come in, and I spend a little bit of time with them, and I ask them, what's the number one thing that surprised you about being here? The top two answers always would be the leadership development and or one or two. The other one would be the amount of feedback that I get. And again, it's because culturally, most younger adults or kids that are the age of my kids, they haven't been getting a lot of feedback besides, hey, you get a trophy for showing up. And so especially the emerging generation hasn't gotten a lot of constructive feedback. And so we have to teach them the value of it and teach them how to do it. You could give me feedback in a way that I might say thank you, or you could give me feedback in a way I'd say Ken's a jerk. And so organizationally, what we want to do is we want to embrace a really helpful, a loving, a constructive way of giving it. And then when we all get better together, especially when we're giving feedback in groups, we see that we're all a little bit better. That creates a win. Suddenly, I don't just endure feedback, I seek it out. For me, before I preach a message, Ken, I'll have into my office probably 4 to maybe as many as 7 groups of people. And a group, maybe 2 people, it may be as many as 5. But I talk through the message with them beforehand because I want feedback. What I want to know is, what have I become emotionally attached to that you don't care about? What's really interesting to me that's boring to you? I'm a 51-year-old father, and you're a 23-year-old single girl. How am I not applying this to your life? And so rather than wait to get feedback on Monday from a message I give on Sunday, I want feedback days before, so it's going to make me better. That is something we value. If you don't embrace feedback in your culture, your whole team is limiting themselves on the potential for improvement.